never blinked, never flinched, never even looked at the man who mocked him, until that man made one fatal mistake. He touched the rifle. What happened next left the crowd stunned and forever changed how they saw the Queen's Guard. If you believe real strength lies in restraint, then don't just watch. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we uncover stories of discipline, honor, and the warriors who stand behind the silence. At Buckingham Palace, amidst the chatter of tourists and the flash of camera phones, Lance Corporal Edward Hale stands motionless. His red tunic and bearskin hat make him look like a relic of the past, a living statue from another time. But Edward isn't just standing still for show. He's not just guarding a gate. He's guarding memory, duty, and legacy. Behind his stoic posture is a man who served 6 years in some of the world's most dangerous combat zones: Afghanistan, Syria, and Mali. He's been shot at, shelled, and ambushed, and yet, here he stands, rifle in hand, gaze locked forward, still, disciplined, and unreadable. On his chest, just above the heart, hangs the Gallantry Medal, awarded for dragging 2 wounded comrades out of a kill zone under heavy fire. Most tourists don't notice it, but some do. 2 elderly American veterans in the crowd spotted right away. One of them, wearing a Korean War cap, nudges the other and whispers, "That one's seen fire, I can tell." Edward doesn't respond. He's trained not to, but deep down, there's weight behind every second of his silence. What visitors don't realize is that the man standing there has experienced more in 30 years than most do in a lifetime. That his stillness isn't empty, it's the coiled strength of someone who knows exactly when to act and when not to. And that's what makes what happens next so dangerous. Some people travel the world in search of beauty. Others come looking for trouble. That afternoon, beneath the soft gray sky of London, trouble had a name: Gavin Reed. He wasn't there for the history. He wasn't there to honor tradition. He was there for the clicks. Tall, fat, and arrogant, Gavin strutted through the palace courtyard like he owned the place. His goal was simple: make the guard break character, film it, go viral, get paid. And he'd done it before. At subway stations, police patrols, even funerals. But today he wanted something bigger, something bolder. He wanted to provoke a soldier in the heart of British ceremony and walk away laughing. As Gavin approached the famed Lance Corporal Edward Hale, the crowd parted, not out of reverence, but from the kind of discomfort only true arrogance can cause. His tone was loud, his presence sharp. And behind him, 2 of his friends whispered and giggled, phones already recording. "Oi, mate," Gavin called out with mock enthusiasm, stepping right into the guard's line of vision. "You blink yet today, or is that sewn on too?" The crowd chuckled nervously, not because it was funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. Edward Hale didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even breathe any differently. But his silence was louder than Gavin's jeers. "Must be hard," Gavin continued, circling like a lazy vulture, "standing out here in the rain, pretending to be important." He squinted at Edward's rifle. "That thing even real, or is it plastic like the rest of this cosplay parade?" 2 elderly tourists, both veterans, shifted on their feet, their eyes narrowing. "Disrespectful punk," one of them muttered. To them, that rifle wasn't a decoration, it was a symbol. They recognized the make, the posture, even the way Edward balanced the weight evenly across his back foot. That wasn't ceremonial, that was tactical. But Gavin didn't see it. He wasn't looking for truth, he was looking for reaction. He moved closer, too close. "I mean, seriously," Gavin said, turning to his phone's hidden lens. "Look at this guy, medal and all, probably printed it off the internet. Do they give those out with the uniform?" Still, Edward didn't respond. That's when Gavin crossed the line, not the one marked by chains or signs, but the invisible line every soldier carries, a line of memory, of sacrifice, of things seen and endured, and when you cross it, you wake something that never fully sleeps. Gavin leaned in, voice lowered but deliberately sharp. "Did you earn those might," he said, "or were they just part of the costume?" His finger pointed toward the gallantry medal, the one Edward received after dragging two bleeding brothers in arms from an ambush in the mountains of Syria. A soft gasp broke from a woman standing nearby. A mother instinctively pulled her child behind her. The entire courtyard seemed to inhale, the tension hanging in the air like thunder before a storm. But Gavin, clueless and cocky, grinned wider. He mimicked the guard's stance, legs straight, chin lifted, arms stiff at his sides. "What's the matter, Tin Man?" he smirked. "They forget to wind you up today?" He began marching in circles around Edward, mock-stepping with exaggerated precision, snapping his heels like a parody. Some tourists laughed uncomfortably, others looked away. And yet, still Edward didn't move, because that's what he was trained for, to withstand mockery, to stand still through chaos, to hold the line between ceremony and combat, until it was truly necessary to act. But Gavin was still climbing, higher, louder, bolder. He leaned in once more and hissed, "I bet you never even saw real combat." It was a statement, not a question. And it was the final straw, not for Edward, not yet, but for the crowd. An older man near the back stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "You man," he said, "you don't know what you're doing. Walk away." But Gavin scoffed. "I'm making a video, Grandpa. Go feed the pigeons." That moment, the blatant disrespect, not just to the guard, but to those who understood what he represented, sent a ripple through the gathered tourists. What had begun as curiosity was now turning into disgust. One woman whispered to her husband, "He has no idea that man probably survived things he couldn't handle for 5 seconds." Another quietly raised her phone, not to film Gavin, but to document what was beginning to feel like something historic. The wind shifted, the clouds darkened, and Gavin reached out his hand. His fingers hovered mere inches from the guard's rifle. And with one foolish step, he crossed the boundary from mockery into threat. There are moments in life when everything slows down, not because time has mercy, but because something sacred is about to be violated. And at that moment, that's exactly what was happening outside Buckingham Palace. Gavin Reed, the prankster with the GoPro and a heart full of arrogance, had poked, mocked, and ridiculed the Queen's Guard long enough. But he wasn't content with just words anymore. He needed something more, something physical, and so he stepped in close, too close. With a smirk on his face and ego in his stride, Gavin extended his hand toward Lance Corporal Edward Hale's rifle, a weapon many assumed was ceremonial, a decoration. But for Edward, it was far more than that. This was the same model he'd carried through burning villages in Helmand, the same weight he'd trained with through blistering heat and biting cold, the same barrel he'd gripped with bloody hands while waiting for medevac that never came. For a brother in arms who bled out in his arms, this was no prop. It was memory, it was meaning, it was a promise made to the fallen, that discipline would never be mistaken for weakness again. And now, Gavin's fingers hovered inches away. From the edge of the crowd, an American veteran held his breath. He saw it before anyone else, the faint shift in Edward's posture, the muscle tension in his forearm, the subtle weight adjustment in his heel. Micro movements invisible to tourists, but crystal clear to a man who'd once faced down insurgents in Fallujah. And then contact. Gavin's fingertips grazed the polished metal of the rifle. That was it, that's all it took. Because the protocol is clear. Touch the guard's weapon and it becomes a threat. Not a game, not a prank, not a YouTube moment. A security breach. In less than a heartbeat, Edward moved. No theatrics, no yelling, just precision. His left foot pivoted cleanly. His right hand swept Gavin's arm downward with surgical efficiency. In one motion, he stepped forward, towering over Gavin, voice low but unmistakably commanding. Step away from the weapon. The entire courtyard went silent. The air itself seemed to shrink. Gavin, stunned, stumbled back. His grin disappeared, replaced by the pale flush of someone who had just realized he wasn't the predator in this moment. He was the prey. Children clung to their parents. Tourists stood frozen, unsure whether to keep filming or put their phones down out of sheer respect. Some did both. From behind the ropes, the elderly veteran finally exhaled and whispered to his wife, "I told you, that one's the real deal." Edward didn't chase. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned back, rifle held firm, body once again motionless. But something had changed. His stillness was no longer mistaken for submission. Now the crowd saw it for what it truly was. A quiet wall of power, unshakable, immovable, sacred. And Gavin? He slinked back to his buddies, mumbling excuses, his camera lens no longer aimed outward but down at the pavement. He wouldn't post the video. He wouldn't brag about what happened. Because deep down he knew he had come to break a soldier's composure. But instead he had exposed his own ignorance and been humbled by dignity far greater than his own. That rifle wasn't just cold steel and polished wood. It was responsibility forged through sacrifice. And for those who've served, for those who've lost brothers, buried friends, and stood watch over places the world forgets, that weapon is never ceremonial. It's a memory held in the grip of a man who hasn't forgotten. He touched the rifle. 3 simple words, but for those who understand the rules, the weight, the risk, those 3 words mean everything. The moment Gavin Reed's fingers curled around the cold barrel of Lance Corporal Edward Hale's rifle, the nature of the moment transformed. This was no longer about a prank, no longer about testing limits. This was a security threat, one that required immediate response, not permission. And in that heartbeat of history, something remarkable happened. Edward Hale, who had not moved a single inch through Gavin's long, mocking performance, suddenly came to life, but not with rage, not with panic, with training, with purpose, with the cold, clean clarity that only comes from years of discipline, forged in fire and refined under pressure. One pivot, his left foot rotated cleanly, his body shifting like a machine springing from sleep. His right hand never left the rifle, but his left snapped forward in a sweeping motion that knocked Gavin's hand free with surgical precision. Before Gavin could react, Edward was standing over him, squared, grounded. Yet he didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "Step away from the weapon, now." 5 words. Calm, icy, commanding. But they carried more force than any shout could deliver. The sound echoed against the stone walls of Buckingham Palace like a drumbeat of authority. A mother gasped. A child cried. Someone dropped their phone. In that moment, every single person in that courtyard saw the truth. That the red uniform wasn't just for show. That the stillness wasn't weakness. That the rifle wasn't a prop. They had been standing in the presence of a warrior all along. And Gavin Reed? He stumbled back, eyes wide, heart racing. Whatever bravado he had brought with him evaporated into the London air. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe a joke, maybe an excuse, but no words came. He was face to face with a man who had survived combat zones, buried brothers, and stood watch through nights darker than Gavin could imagine. And now that man stood before him, not to punish, but to protect. Because that's what real soldiers do. They don't act out of ego. They act out of duty. Edward didn't chase Gavin down. He didn't mock him in return. He simply turned back toward the palace gates, reset his posture, and resumed his silent watch, as though nothing had happened, but everything had changed. The crowd, moments ago buzzing with laughter and curiosity, now stood in reverent silence. Tones were lowered, conversations hushed. A few even removed their hats. It wasn't fear that filled the air, it was respect. A quiet, powerful understanding swept through those gathered, that the Queen's Guard wasn't some tourist attraction, that these men and women weren't actors in costume. They were living monuments to sacrifice, to strength, to the invisible weight of service carried in silence. At the back of the crowd, a Korean War veteran whispered to his grandson, "That is what discipline looks like." The boy nodded, wide-eyed. He wouldn't forget this moment. None of them would. Even the security guards approaching Gavin didn't need to say much. He went quietly, head down, camera off. He had come looking for content. He left with a lesson. The transition from stillness to action happened in less than 3 seconds, but the impact would last far longer. It would ripple through that crowd, through the thousands who would later watch the footage, through veterans who would feel a silent nod of recognition in their chest. Because that moment wasn't about punishment, it was about boundary, about drawing a line not with violence but with clarity, a line that says, this is sacred, this is earned, this will be protected. And for those who understand duty, not just in uniform but in life, there's something truly powerful in that. In just under 10 seconds, a man went from mockery to surrender, and a crowd went from laughter to silence. As Lance Corporal Edward Hale returned to position, rifle upright, eyes forward, not a single soul in the Buckingham Palace courtyard said a word. The same people who had once jostled for selfies, cracked jokes, and dared to see if the guard would move, now stood in hushed reverence. The stillness they once treated as a game, they now understood was a shield, a discipline honed in blood, not pageantry. Gavin Reed, the man who dared to test that shield, was no longer grinning. As palace security approached from both sides, Gavin didn't argue, didn't protest. He didn't even meet Edward's eyes. Head down, mouth shut, the so-called internet prankster had been humbled, not by force, but by composure. He had walked into the lion's den thinking he was the apex predator, but he left realizing the lion had never been asleep, just still. Some tourists whispered. Others didn't speak at all. A man from Nebraska gently put his arm around his wife and said, "Honey, I think we just saw something important." She nodded, wiping the corner of her eye. Nearby, a little boy who had earlier been mimicking the guard's stance now stood behind his father, whispering, "Dad, that man's not a statue, is he?" His dad crouched down, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "No, son, he's a soldier." The moment, though short, had transformed everything. It wasn't just the guard who had shifted. The entire perception of the crowd had changed. They no longer looked at the red tunic and bearskin hat as some charming tradition to photograph. They saw it as a uniform of duty, a symbol of generations who had stood their ground when the world needed them to. An elderly American man with a Vietnam service pin on his coat stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. His back was slightly hunched, but with every step, his posture straightened. By the time he stood within regulation distance of the guard's post, he was tall again. Not by height, by memory. He paused, eyes locked on Edward. Then, as if time rewound itself, he raised his right hand and delivered a crisp, silent salute. No words, just one veteran honoring another. Edward did not break his stance, did not return the salute. But somehow, in that quiet exchange, everything necessary was communicated. A shared language between men who've served. a respect beyond ceremony. The tourists who remained stood back respectfully, cameras lowered, voices softened, children calmed. The Queen's Guard was no longer just a photo opportunity. He was now seen for what he truly was, a protector, standing in the space between chaos and order. And for the first time that day, the tourists weren't just taking pictures. They were witnessing a story. They didn't need subtitles. They didn't need commentary. They could feel it in the air. Something sacred had just been defended without a single shot fired. Later, in nearby cafes and hotel lobbies, people would retell what they saw. A mother explained to her children what standing guard really meant. A history teacher from Ohio, who had just planned to stop for photos, found himself answering questions about military tradition. One man quietly said, "You know, I used to think they were just for show. I was wrong." The ripples of that moment traveled further than any viral video ever could. Because it didn't just change how people saw the guard, it changed how they saw discipline, silent strength, and the price of peace. And Edward Hale? Yabble, he didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't even twitch. He simply remained still, just as he had before, just as he was trained to do. But now he wasn't standing in front of strangers. He was standing in front of witnesses. People who had seen not just the uniform, but the man within it. The soldier beneath the ceremony. The strength behind the silence. The silence of the Queen's Guard is not empty. It is full of meaning, full of memory, full of the kind of quiet power this world rarely recognizes until it's revealed. And sometimes it takes a fool trying to break the silence to remind the rest of us why it was there in the first place. Stillness, strength, and the soldier who said everything without a word. We've now come to the end of this powerful story. But sometimes the end of a story is really just the beginning of a deeper understanding. What began with a young man in uniform standing still outside Buckingham Palace became a lesson in strength, honor, and restraint that touched everyone who witnessed it, and maybe even those who are watching now. Because this wasn't just a tale about a disrespectful prank gone wrong. It wasn't just about rules being broken or consequences being delivered. It was about something much more universal, something timeless. In a world that moves too fast, where noise often drowns out meaning, where people rush to speak before they listen, stillness has become rare. But as Lance Corporal Edward Hale showed us, stillness isn't weakness. It's a choice, a sign of self-control, a reflection of inner discipline, the kind that isn't taught in schools but is earned through service, hardship, and sacrifice. For older generations, especially those of you who've worn a uniform, who've raised families or worked long careers, this story might feel familiar because you've lived it. You've stood firm when others faltered. You've held your ground in moments that called for calm heads. You've known when to speak and when to let silence speak louder. Gavin Reed came to Buckingham Palace to get a reaction. He walked right past centuries of tradition and honor, thinking the man in front of him was just decoration. He learned swiftly and clearly that he was wrong. There's something sacred about service. It doesn't matter whether you served in a foxhole, a hospital, a school, or even just your family. Service deserves respect. And sometimes it takes a confrontation like this to remind the rest of us that respect isn't optional. It's the thread that holds a civilized society together. For those of you watching who have grandchildren, you know, this world doesn't always teach respect the way it used to. But stories like this one, they can be a bridge between generations. So what can we take from this? Whether you're 25 or 75, there's a message here. Don't mistake silence for surrender. Don't confuse stillness with inaction. And never assume that calm means powerless. True strength isn't about how loud you are. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to move with purpose. In a time when everyone's trying to go viral, the real power lies in those who stay grounded. in the people who don't need to prove anything, because their character speaks for itself. How this applies to everyday life? You don't have to be a soldier to apply this lesson. You could be a grandfather breaking up a family disagreement not by shouting but by listening. A retired nurse who remains calm while helping a neighbor through a tough diagnosis. A widow who shows grace in grief, inspiring others simply by the strength of her quiet dignity. In these moments, your restraint becomes your power, and just like Edward Hale, your actions, or lack of them, can change the atmosphere in a room. From our viewers, what would you rate this story? We'd love to hear from you now. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story, not just for the action, but for the message it carries? Drop your rating in the comments below and let us know why. Did it remind you of your time in the service? Did it make you think of someone you once knew? Or maybe it gave you hope for what discipline and dignity still mean in today's world. We read every comment, and we deeply appreciate the wisdom you all share. Before you go, a word from the heart. If this story stirred something in you, whether it was pride, memory, or inspiration, then we invite you to be part of this community. Hit the like button to show your support for those who stand in quiet strength. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories about courage, honor, and the human spirit. And if you know someone who could use a reminder that respect still matters, share this video with them. Let's spread these stories not just for entertainment, but to uplift, educate, and honor those who've earned our gratitude. The guard at Buckingham Palace never spoke. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't boast. But in that one decisive moment, he told the world everything they needed to know. That tradition still lives. That discipline still holds. That real power doesn't need to move fast because it already stands tall. Thank you for watching. And to all those who served in any way, in any place, we salute you.